The Last Post, the traditional final salute to the fallen, has been played every evening at the Menin Gate in Ypres, northwest Belgium, since 1928, in honour of the memory of the soldiers of the former British Empire and its allies who died in the Ypres salient during the First World War.
During that conflict, cricketers from all over the world redirected their sporting qualities and passions to the war effort. A huge number were never to return. Here is the story of two of them, both of whom left their names indelibly marked on the cricketing record books.
The period known as the Golden Age of cricket took place in the years leading up to the outbreak of war, and Kent's Colin Blythe was one of its leading lights.
Well, you look at it as the golden age of batsmanship in many ways. There were great hitters, but there's a wonderful painting of Canterbury Cricket Week, and you would expect to see the focus on the batsman, but it isn't. It's on a bowler, and it is Colin Blythe bowling from the pavilion end, the flags fluttering. I think he was an enormous name because Blythe not only was a great bowler, taking 2,500 wickets in his first-class career, 100 wickets in 19 Test matches, but he was much loved by everyone, by the players and by the spectators. There was just something about him that was clearly so attractive. But most importantly, he enjoyed bowling against the best batsmen, and the best batsmen loved playing against him. They said that because if they went after him, hit him for 4 or 6, he just tossed the ball up a bit more with just a bit of extra flight or turn, and he enjoyed trying to lure them into the trap, and of course they did fall into it. In the county game, he was supreme. 5 wickets in every Test match he played, so again a brilliant record, but at the highest level there are great gaps. He suffered from epilepsy and wasn't always fit.
So despite that, he obviously was called up to service.
Well, like so many of them, he wasn't actually called up, he volunteered. They were all volunteering at that stage. There wasn't conscription. And the county cricketers, by and large, most of them were signing up.
In September 1917, whilst serving with the 12th Battalion King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry, Blythe went out to face the horrors of the Battle of Passchendaele as an engineer working on a military railway line.
On the evening of the 8th of November, a German shell burst behind the enemy line. 5 men were killed, one of whom was Blythe. The shrapnel pierced his clothes, the wallets in his breast pocket, the photograph of his waiting wife, and finally his body. The war diary of the battalion recorded simply: 3 other ranks killed, 6 wounded, 1 missing. B Company.
In choosing the words which form the epitaph on the headstone of his grave, Blythe's widow proudly proclaimed his sporting eminence. Our second story ends here in Ypres, but starts in the heart of the West Country.
It was here at Clifton College in 1899 that 13-year-old Arthur Edward James Collins made the incredible score of 628 not out, which remains to this day the highest individual score in the history of cricket.
Well, he was born in India in 1885, and his father died when he was young, probably of cholera, because that was one of the dangers of service out in India. So he was sent back to Tavistock to his relatives, who then moved him to Clifton in 1898, where he went into a house called Clark's House, which was a junior school house, and the innings took place a year later in the now famous house match between Clark's House and Northtown between the 22nd and the 29th of July in 1899. It was extraordinary. I mean, it took 7 days, but of course there were 2 days out over the weekend because Northtown were day boys, so they didn't come in at the weekend. And it took place after school between 3:30 and 6 o'clock, when the curfew bell, as it was called, was rung and everybody had to go back to their houses. By the end of the first day, he'd scored 400 runs, which in itself was quite a feat.
How good a player was he?
It's difficult to say. If you look at his cricket career afterwards, he clearly liked to go after the bowling straight away, which is rather a paradox because to score 628 over 5 days suggests a lot of patience, but he clearly liked to clatter the ball. He didn't go on to play county cricket because actually his heart was set on the army, and he left school at 16 to go into the Royal Engineers. So 1914, war broke out in August, and he was off to Mons. And in October, you get what's called the race to the sea, where both sides dashed to get hold of the seaport so the Germans couldn't go around the side. And that was the cause of the first Battle of Ypres, and Collins was part of that battle.
The struggle for Ypres reached a bloody and brutal climax on Wednesday the 11th of November. German guns unleashed a massive bombardment on the British lines. Facing certain annihilation against overwhelming odds, the small force of Royal Engineers, occupying a disused trench, somehow absorbed the initial impact of the assault.
Fierce fighting continued throughout the morning here at Polygon Wood, and in signalling for reinforcements, Collins was shot and mortally wounded. Under withering machine gun fire, sappers Farmfield and Matthews carried him back to the trench, where he died an hour later.
Collins was posthumously gazetted captain on the 20th of January 1915 and is commemorated at Ypres on the Meningate Memorial.
These two tragic deaths are typical of so many cricketers who came from all the major cricketing nations of the world and fought on land, on the sea and in the air. They gave up everything and redirected their sporting passions and energies for the war effort.